Howdy and welcome to Curious Blend. I am your host, Keller Davis, the owner of Createscape Coworking here in Austin, Texas. And this show is about exploring the intersections of creativity, business, leadership, and philosophy. And in each episode, I'm going to be doing a deep dive with inspiring guests where we can hear their unique perspectives and stories. I'm here to learn and to stay curious. So today I'm thrilled to welcome our guest, Jessica Bross, to the podcast. As some backstory, Jessica is the founder of Cider Spoon Stories, Austin's top ghostwriting and memoir coaching company. And since 2014, she has ghostwritten over 40 nonfiction books inspired by the experience of authoring her grandfather's life story. Jessica also publishes under her maiden name, Jessica Hageman, with her work appearing in prestigious publications and her debut novel, Headcheese, winning an IPPY award in horror. So I'm really excited to explore her creative process, her business journey, and life experiences. So Jessica, welcome to Curious Blend.
Oh, that was such a nice introduction. Thank you, Keller.
You're welcome. I know we've known I've known you for a few years at Createscape, and I've seen you present at our Present Your Passion event series at the Space.
Yes.
But I feel like this is, I don't know, for me, this conversation feels long overdue because I'm always so busy and running around with like a chicken with my head cut off. So it's nice to get to talk to you today.
I think that happens to all business owners.
Yeah.
Yes.
For most people I see, everyone seems to be kind of like pretty focused on their own work at Createscape. So I get it. Well, I want to talk about your creative process and inspiration. Can you walk me through what your creative process is? Like when it comes to ghostwriting, for example, how do you turn someone's life story into a compelling narrative?
Good question. So I do ghostwrite mostly memoirs, people's life stories. And well, first off, everybody has had a completely different life from everybody else. We're all going to have things in common, but we're also so individual, and our experiences of the same events can be so individual that I think there's no such thing as a bad life story when it comes to, is my story worth turning into a book? It absolutely is. It's just about finding the right angle that's going to be compelling for readers, that's going to keep them turning pages, that's going to allow them to relate to you as the author and find bits of their own lives and their own selves in the story that you're sharing, and then they can, in turn grow from that and learn from that as well. So that creative process looks like sitting down with a client and just starting to talk casually, just like this, asking questions about their childhood and what it was like for them growing up, and then some of the more common touch points that we all have in common, like, first experiences falling in love, or if they pursued education or have a particular career that they're very passionate about. And we just kind of talk about those things until we find what is the beating heart of the story. And usually that can be distilled down to what it was that they wanted out of life. We call that the desire line in their story. And once we find that, we can trace that through the story from the moment they first realized they wanted that thing until the moment either they achieved it or they stopped wanting it, or something else became more important, whatever it is. And so that's actually why you get writers who can make careers as memoirists and write lots of memoirs. There's a misconception that a memoir has to encompass your entire life story, and it doesn't. It's just telling part of your story at that particular time that answers the question what you wanted at that time in your life. So that's kind of the process, is chatting until we can boil down and distill down to that essential question, what you wanted in the story we're going to tell. And then we can start to structure the scenes around that.
Cool. Yeah, I know people who have written memoirs like in their 20s just because they had enough to fill up the pages with. And it wasn't until I read it that it made a little bit more sense to me. But
you can be any age, have any kind of life experience. There's no qualifications or credentials for being worthy of writing a memoir.
You mentioned desire line.
Yes.
Is that your term, or is that a memoir term?
That's a memoir term. Yes,
okay.
I would not take personal credit for that.
Okay, I was just curious. Like, had you done ghostwriting prior to working on your grandfather's?
No, my grandfather's book was my first ghostwriting experience. It came on the heels of It was actually my last semester in grad school. I was pursuing an MFA in creative writing. And that last semester, we didn't have any classes and we're just writing our theses. So I decided to go live with a friend in Hawaii for a while and spend 6 months surfing and just being a beach bum. And while I was there, my grandfather got sick. And he was somebody that was very special and important to me. And I knew that he had a lot of stories that he had never been able to share with his friends and family because he'd been an arson investigator. And there were statutes of limitations on those cases, so he couldn't always talk about them. But those had begun to expire, and it was very important to me to help him get some of those stories down for posterity while we still could. So while I'm in Hawaii, I am sending him lists of questions. He was very, an analog man. So rather than emailing or anything like that, he actually went and got a tape recorder and recorded himself answering the questions. Physically mailed me the cassettes in Hawaii. He was in Kansas. In Hawaii, I had to then go to a thrift store and find a cassette player so I could play the tapes, transcribe them, and then I would send him back more questions. And that was our process for working together on that first book. And it was a little laborious, but fascinating and very rewarding. And we got it done. And then he passed away 4 days later, at which point I was able to give his book to family and friends at the funeral. And seeing their reaction is what encouraged me to see if other families could benefit from a service like that. So when my company first started, it really was just to help grandpas and grandmas tell their life stories for their grandkids and do those kind of family history legacy style books. And then over the past 10 years has expanded to, include life stories in general. In particular, I've worked with a lot of veterans and other small business owners. My grandfather was also a veteran. And then also people writing business books or self-help books, how-to books, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I've done similar things, not to that extent with my grandparents, where I conducted little video interviews with them just to ask some questions about their life. And I wish I'd done more of that when most of them were around. But it was, some of the answers were very surprising to the rest of my family members. And it was kind of like peeling back like an onion of like these layers of like their life that they didn't even know about certain things.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you had the foresight to do that. Too many people, hear about the service I offer and say, oh, I wish I had you write my mom's story while she was still with us, and now it's too late. So it's great that you did that. It's great that you had the medium of video to do that as well, which is a great complement to print, but also kind of a different experience.
Sure.
So sometimes people come to me, wanting more of the video style storytelling, and then I refer them to somebody else who does that because I just work in the book space.
Right.
Yeah.
I did this thing with my grandma who's still alive called Storyworth. Like, I didn't realize the extent that I would have to edit all the answers.
Oh.
So.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great place for people to start because it provides the prompts to get you thinking about, meaningful stories from your life. And then, as you said, you can go all the way through the process and have the book at the end. So it's a great alternative to hiring a ghostwriter.
What are some of the most memorable stories that you've come across, like in the years that you've been doing this, which it's been 10 years now, I
10
guess?
years this year, yeah. Man, each has been memorable for one reason or another. But I mentioned that I've worked with a lot of veterans. That was not something I sought out necessarily. But after I worked with my grandfather, I then worked with a former military chaplain who had served in Vietnam. And what was interesting about that story was, I don't know if this holds true today, but at the time, chaplains were not allowed to carry weapons into war. And yet he wanted to be on the front lines with his men. And so he armed himself with a slingshot. And that is all he had with him in the jungles of Vietnam. And it was just this incredible story. And I loved that so much. And since then, the Vietnam War era veterans has kind of become a special niche of mine. And I think that's just because that generation of veterans is starting to get to the age where they realize that they're not immortal and are not going to live forever. And it's time to put down some of those stories if they want to. And it's been so healing for so many of them since, of course, that was not a war that had a lot of support in this country at the time.
You've also collected ghost stories in India.
Yes.
So how exactly was that process like, or how has it impacted the rest of your writing, I guess, since then?
Yes. So people who aren't familiar with ghostwriting, sometimes when they hear that, think it has something to do with ghost stories. They are two completely different fields. But my whole life really, I've had an interest in ghost stories and horror. It's my favorite thing to read and watch. And when I was in college, I won a research grant to go to India. This was kind of in my world religions phase, and study the confluence of Hinduism, people who were devoutly Hindu, and who also at the same time believed in magic and witchcraft. And I was just very curious about how you could hold those two beliefs together, what that looked like for people on a daily basis. And so with this grant, I traveled to India, stayed at an ashram, and the guru who ran the ashram took me around the small fishing village of Sri Vardhan, where it was located, to interview people about their experiences. And it was fascinating. Something that I took from that I still think about all of the time is that, I had my little recorder and I was recording these people, and later I worked with a translator to translate their stories. And anybody who I came into contact who helped me or who was part of the interview process would, light a stick of incense or go say a prayer at the family shrine or whatever it was, because there was a very strong and pervasive belief that just by talking about ghosts or spirits or gods or whatever the topic was, that the act of talking about it invoked a power or a presence that made us vulnerable, and we needed to protect ourselves during that process. And not only that, but the recorder itself that I recorded the stories on was then believed to be imbued with the power of those stories and needed to be kept in a locked box,
Wow.
according to the people that I was interviewing. How that translates to my ghostwriting work today is that early on, I realized I'm an empath, and connecting to people's stories, sometimes I would overconnect and over-identify with their pain or, hard parts of their story that they were telling. And I had to learn to let the book that I was writing for that client be that locked box, the kind of container that I could put the story and the experience in and not carry it inside of my own body. Otherwise, I was going to bed at night and dreaming about the stories they told me, and it was just, it was too much. I had to create a little emotional border there. So, long story short, yes, collecting ghost stories in India, in a way, taught me something about ghostwriting today.
You also just published Headcheese.
Yes.
Was it this year or last year?
Well, that was actually in 2018.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And then I have a new novel coming out next year.
Okay, maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Then. Yeah. Okay, cool. I mean, I know you said you already liked horror. Had you written horror before that?
Oh, yes. Definitely lots of short stories. And I'd probably actually written 5 novel drafts that were just complete garbage and, are just sitting on my hard drive and will never see the light of day. And that's okay. Before I wrote Headcheese. And that one was just, it's very serendipitous. Well, not serendipitous. Maybe everything is meant to be. But I had an illustrator for that book. It's fully illustrated as well. And the illustrator was sitting in the room at a writing conference one day, and he heard a publisher on the panel describe the types of books that they were looking for. The illustrator thought that sounded like Headcheese, so he went up and pitched my book to the publisher for me. The publisher was like, yes, I want this. And I sent them the manuscript, and 6 months later, that book was out in the world. So that was really amazing.
Yeah, I haven't heard of like publishing kind of go through that process before.
Even in publishing, they say it's who you know, sometimes more than what you know, or even your level of talent. So I was really grateful to that illustrator for sticking up for me there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love horror myself, and
Nice.
so I watch a ton of horror movies. I haven't read as many like horror stories before, but yeah, I got the ebook version of Headcheese, and so I'm like about halfway through it right now.
Oh, thanks.
And it's it definitely makes me squeamish. Like there's definitely a lot of it where I'm like, but it's like I like Hellraiser, and it gives me those kind of vibes too.
Oh man, I love Hellraiser. Yeah.
So I'm definitely into it so far. So
nice. Well, thank you for reading.
Yeah, I was going to ask about like your business too. So like it sounds like Cider Spoon Stories started in 2014, the same year that I started my business, and So 10 years for both of us, I guess.
Yeah.
When starting Cider Spoon Stories, how did you what were the biggest challenges that you had in the early part of that, and how did you overcome them?
Sure. Well, I have been very entrepreneurial my whole life. I've never actually had a salaried position of any kind. Even after grad school, I went to teach at a university, so I was doing the adjunct professor thing. And I was also working at a museum in a contractor role at the same time, and had an Etsy store, and just piecing lots of little things together as you do. And when I got the idea to actually turn the ghostwriting experience I'd had with my grandfather into a full-fledged business, I didn't know the first thing about, registering a DBA, doing business as, or paying quarterly taxes or sales taxes or anything. So there was the normal learning curve that you undergo when you're just trying to accumulate basic business knowledge. And then, of course, there's the fact that nobody knows who you are and you want to try to sell a service to a wide variety of people. And so just networking all of the time. I knew, right, that I wanted to help grandparents primarily write their life stories. And so I was going to a lot of senior living facilities, making presentations at those. I was doing pre-classes at the library. I was 27 then. So I had a lot of energy to just kind of hustle and try everything and see what stuck. And my first client, I look back now and laugh at what I charged for them. It felt like so much at the time, but I was still in that newbie phase of, oh, I can't charge too much. Nobody will hire me, or I'm new, so nobody's going to take me seriously, so I have to set low prices. So just kind of all of the familiar pitfalls for somebody starting a business at the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. I was on a very similar pathway when I was starting Createscape, because I didn't really know exactly what I was doing at all, and even just like the logistics of business, I had to just Google a lot of stuff to figure it
Yeah.
out in the early days. And even just building up a clientele, it was in the early days was hard, but yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like making those presentations and like kind of like looking for the people that would most be interested in ghostwriting paid off over time. Like having written 40 books by this point, right?
Yes. Well, once you kind of have the proof of concept, right? Because people always want to know, well, what other projects have you worked on? What other books have you written that I can read? And that can be particularly tough in a ghostwriting scenario because generally I have non-disclosure agreements with my clients, right? And their name is the one that goes on the book cover. And then I can't use that as a way to advertise for my services. So I did two things to kind of combat that early on. One was that I partnered with nonprofits to write books of the stories of their clients that I could put my name on and use that as a way to advertise my services and also help those nonprofits because all of the proceeds from that series of books went back to the nonprofits that they featured. And then two, I slowly started to amass clients who were willing to share credit. And so it would be their name with Jessica Bross on the cover. And then, of course, I could use those as marketing tools. And then, you get enough of those and people start referring you and say, well, you should write a book and you should work with Jess. I worked with her and we had a great time or whatever. And so as that word of mouth built, that was really helpful for my business.
So with dealing with personal storytelling, it also involves so much trust with representing someone's story. How have you built and maintained trust with your clientele in that process?
It is super important, especially if the story that the person wants to tell, it just, is painful or is traumatic in any way, and they're still dealing with that and sorting all of that. The act of sharing it with your ghostwriter or with your therapist or whoever it is, that can be extremely cathartic, but they're not going to do that until they feel like they can trust you, just like you said. So for me, with a new client, that starts, of course, with our watertight contract that says things like, I'm not going to steal your book. The copyright remains in your name at all times. Nobody's going to know we work together. You don't have to publish if we get to the end and you don't like the book or you have changed your mind about sharing your story with the world. So letting them know how protected they are from the beginning. And then just, again, having these informal conversations and getting to know each other. And I just try to approach each new project with the same kindness and compassion that I would want somebody to approach me if I was sharing my life story with them, and just listen. I think that we don't really listen to each other enough these days. Everybody's posting their thoughts on social media and whatever, and it's just about creating content. And sometimes we don't slow down enough to just listen to the people around us. And so I think when you slow down and deeply listen to the person across from you too, that can also help them feel safer and like they can trust you.
Yeah. Have you stayed in touch with anyone since writing about their story, or?
Yes. Most of my clients I am still in touch with in one way or another. And because this is my 10th year in business, in December, I'm getting ready to gather them all together for a virtual event where they all get to read from their books that have come out over the years, and just kind of celebrate everything they've given me and everything they've given to the world. So that'll be a fun event.
Oh, that's amazing. I
Yeah.
love to hear that. I think even in business, like making it to 10 years is such a milestone. With Createscape, we did an event like in May that was kind of about celebrating members and stuff,
Yeah.
just because
Yeah.
like there's so many businesses that don't make it to that point, so it's kind of it feels worth putting together something for it. So I'm glad you
Absolutely.
are.
Congratulations on your
Oh,
milestone.
thank you.
I was,
Co-working is not something that everyone is drawn to because, usually it's like because you need like just a place to work and, because you don't otherwise have an office. So we attract a lot of people who are, have their own businesses or freelance or working on their own projects. But yeah, I'm just curious, like what led you to co-working and what did you get out of the experience?
yeah. So I joined Createscape in 2020 when it was the height of the pandemic. And most people might hear that and think that that's crazy. We were all supposed to be staying at home and not like going out and joining people in a shared office space. But Createscape offered these great pods that allowed us to still, feel like we had a little private working space. So that was great. But the real impetus for that was my husband, who I had just married like 2 months before I was then laid off during COVID. And so for the first time, we found ourselves both in the house every day, all day. And we didn't know at that point how to work together in the same space because he also decided to start his own business, which was great. And I wanted to support him in it, but we were just in each other's way. And so we needed a place that at least one of us could get out of the house and just have a little bit of space from each other. And so Createscape was the perfect solution for that for 4 years. We ended up co-working here, and by the end of that time, we had just finally found that balance for each other where we could both work from home in the same space and respect each other's space and whatever. So during that time, co-working was a real lifesaver for our whole relationship.
Oh, that's beautiful to hear.
Yeah.
I love hearing that. I didn't realize that you had just gotten married before
Yes.
that time, 2020.
Our wedding was supposed to be at the end of May 2020. No, sorry, the end of March. And that is right when Austin went into lockdown. And so our
Yeah.
wedding was canceled, and we became the first couple in the county to have a Zoom wedding with a judge. So it
Yeah.
was what it was.
Like they told you that when you.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah. I'm really glad that we did it because obviously at the time nobody knew how long
Yeah.
COVID was going to be a real threat. And, of course, here we are in 2024 and there's pockets of it popping up again. But it was just definitely the right move for us at the time.
So what does a typical day look like for you in terms of like balancing the responsibilities of a business but also the creative side of writing? Like what are there habits and routines that you put in place that help you kind of juggle all that?
For me personally, I know I'm a morning person. That's when my energy is highest and when I'm most likely to feel creative. And so that is when I'm working on writing. I like to have long, uninterrupted stretches of writing to really dive into the story and, knock out most of a chapter or something in a sitting. So morning is where I'm doing that most intensive work. In the afternoons, in addition to ghostwriting, I also offer editing to people who have already written their own books. or coaching to people who want to write their own books but just want some accountability and guidance, cheerleading along the way. I'm generally doing those in the afternoon because they don't require quite the same creative output from me. And checking emails sporadically in between there. If I just have my inbox open the whole time, it's going to distract me from what I'm writing. So I definitely have to close that down and be dedicated.
Yeah, I've really tried to shift myself to being a morning person when it comes to creativity.
Mm.
Like I'm in the middle of organizing a book club for The Artist's Way. And so I'm kind
Oh,
of going
nice.
through with
Yeah.
just like, yeah, morning pages and all these kind of things that are just trying to like make creativity more of a routine for me so that it's not just like one-off things whenever I happen to feel inspired or something. But so far it feels
Yeah.
like it's working, and like the process, I'm just trusting in the process, and it's helping.
Yeah. I think morning pages are just so great for clearing all of the junk out of your head and just letting you get settled in your body in the moment and begin.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Like, how do you continue to grow and evolve both as a writer and a business owner? Like, what is like over the last 10 years?
Well, like any business, mine has ridden the roller coaster of highs and lows, where sometimes I have more clients than I can handle, and sometimes there are long fallow periods where I worry I will never land another client again. And those fallow periods, have required me to get creative and pivot occasionally, do things like offer memoir writing classes, for example. Those tend to attract people who think, oh, I'm want to write a memoir. I'm going to learn how to do it. They get into the class, they learn about it, they try their hand at it, decide maybe it's more work than they wanted to take on, and then they end up hiring me as a ghostwriter. So that's been a good conversion tool there. So teaching classes has been one way I've evolved. The actual process has not changed that much, except for one key thing, which is that early on, I had a lot of ego in the game and thought, oh, this book has to be perfect before I present it to the client. And so I would try to write the whole thing while they, went about their daily lives, then send them the whole manuscript. And it never worked because it's overwhelming to receive an entire book and try to take in that much information and pick apart what you like or don't like, what's working or not working for you. And so neither the client nor I were generally satisfied in that situation. So what I now do is, as each chapter is finished, I send it to the client. And that way, from the very beginning, if there are any issues with tone or how they sound on the page or the message that they want to convey, we are editing all that from the first chapter, so that if we do that chapter by chapter, by the end of the book, it's been very high touch for the client as far as they're concerned, and yet they haven't had to do a ton of the work either. And then we are both generally more satisfied with the product at the end. So that was definitely something I evolved in my process.
How long does like writing a book usually take you?
So generally 6 months is the timeline I tell people, from the time you start working together until the time they have copies in hand is 6 months. So early on, that looks like the interviews that we schedule to generate that content. Then I go away and write for a little bit, send them those chapters as they're finished. We do any edits that we need to. And then if they are interested in just self-publishing, we move right into layout and cover design and, getting their book up on Amazon or whatever their goals are. Some people want to publish traditionally or go through a hybrid press. And then we, talk about how you accomplish those goals too. So really just depends on what the person is interested in.
Okay. So you do coaching as well for the publishing side of it?
I do.
Oh,
yes.
okay.
Yes.
Oh, that's really cool. Do you have favorite books or authors that have inspired you in your own writing?
Definitely. So because the two genres I write in are memoir and horror, those are the two genres I read in exclusively too. So some memoirs I have just loved lately include Jamie Nakamura Lynn's The Night Parade. She's a writer of a Japanese American and Taiwanese American descent, and she draws on the mythology of those cultures to present like a mythical character, talk about its caricature traits, and then apply those to whatever was happening in her own life. And it's also a memoir that's fully illustrated by her sister, who's an artist. So it's just a beautiful book all around. So that's been something I've really loved in the memoir space. Anything that kind of takes what we think of as your standard memoir and inverts it a little bit or plays with it or does something outside the usual. I love reading those because they teach me a new way into the craft each time. In terms of horror, my favorite authors are Catriona Ward. She's an English horror writer who she must have the most brilliant mind because you never know what's going to happen in her book. It's just twist after twist after twist. It amazes me. And I really love Mark Danielewski, of course, House of Leaves. Read him in college, and that I'm sure has influenced everything I've written since.
Are there genres that you haven't dabbled in yet that you have thought about getting into?
Well, interestingly, last fall I had a ghostwriting commission to write the script for an interactive app game, and it was werewolf erotica, which was completely new to me. And so that was a really fun genre to get to experiment in. And so I don't know if there's any genres I'm necessarily seeking out right now, but when clients come to me with really out of left field projects like that, I get very excited by it.
Yeah. Do you go into research mode at that point? Like just
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, in terms of the researching, of course, what the client expects, making sure I'm very clear on all of those specs, and then going away and doing research on, in this case, werewolf bondage and etc.
yeah.
Yeah.
I always sometimes when I'm writing, I feel limited by thinking that I should stay in my lane and only write about the things that I know.
Mm.
But sometimes I will shift that mindset a little bit to think like, well, I can put myself in someone else's shoes or research something a little bit more and really, just kind of become more interested in it. And then, try my best to make it sound as authentic as possible. Like,
yes, definitely. I mean, so in ghostwriting, of course, the story is being given to me by the client, and I'm just helping them present it in an accessible and engaging way. When it comes to my fiction, I always like to start with a seed of truth or something from my true experience to begin with, and then I generally do a lot of research as well. So in Headcheese, which is a book about body integrity identity disorder, there was definitely a lot of medical knowledge that I was trying to acquire there, as well as interviewing people directly about their experiences with BIID. In my novel that's coming out next year, it is based on the life of Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France. And so, I was reading all of the biographies that have been published about her. And even though my story is set in present day Austin, it matches beat for beat the life of Marie Antoinette all the way up to her beheading during the Revolution. So it's super fun.
Oh, that's cool. Is it wait? So it's set in Austin in present day.
Present day Austin.
Okay.
Yes. So instead of being married off to King Louis at age 14, my Marie Antoinette is kind of sold to the leader of a sex cult in Austin as his underage wife.
I see. Okay,
Yes.
so like a reinterpretation.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Well, that sounds fascinating. Are there any other more details you can share about that in terms of when it's expected to come out? Or
Oh, sure. It's being published by Ghoulish Books in San Antonio and comes out in October 2025.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, I look forward to that.
Thank you.
What advice would you give to someone who is considering writing their own memoir or life story?
I would say to get a big piece of poster board and some markers and draw a timeline on the board and start labeling it with the big events that have happened in your life. You can start with births, right? Your own, your siblings, if you have them, your parents, anybody else who you think is going to factor into your life story. You can add things like education, if that's been applicable to you, any career milestones, promotions, things like that on your timeline, military service if you've had it. You can add formative relationships, marriage, friendships, whatever those look like. You can add formative faith events if you're a spiritual or faithful person, any rites that you underwent as part of that. And just kind of think about these broad categories of your life and all the things you can populate that timeline with. And then on top of that, start to layer maybe political events that were happening during those times, or natural disasters, or COVID, or other things that you may have gone through. And that hands-on approach, I feel, really gets you out of your head and out of worrying, like, is the story I'm going to tell good enough, or where does my story start, or all of those things, and just puts it all out there before you so you can see it at once, and you can see how, you were doing this when 9/11 happened, and so that, caused whatever confluence in your own life. And that's just a really good way to start, to have it all spread out there before you, and then you can pick from there the pieces of the timeline that feel relevant to the story that you want to tell in this particular book.
Yeah.
So that's where I'd start.
Do you seek out feedback from people in the writing process as well, or like are there people you
During
trust?
in ghostwriting or writing fiction?
Either, yeah. Because obviously I know with ghostwriting you have you have your clients.
Yes. So in a ghostwriting situation, the client is the one I'm trying to make happy.
Yeah.
So again, each chapter is sent to them as it's written for their feedback. If they then want to self-publish, it will go through a proofreader yet to make sure there are not any typos or other grammatical errors that accidentally got left in the manuscript. And that's generally the process for that. If they're going to try to traditionally publish after that, we're going to write a query letter and a synopsis and help them start trying to solicit agents. And then, of course, if it was picked up, whatever editor got assigned to the book at that point would kind of take over. In fiction, when it comes to my own novels, I definitely have a trusty team of beta readers who I send early drafts of the manuscript to for feedback. I think where in some ways each writer is only as good as the other writers they surround themselves with, and that there are always going to be plot holes or offensive stereotypes or other things that made it into your manuscript when you weren't paying attention. And so it's great to just have a sounding board to reflect your work back to you.
It sounds like there's always a little bit of collaboration that's at play.
Definitely. Yeah. Which is good because we always, or at least I tend to think of writing as a very solitary pursuit. And so I think it's great to build communities around yourself for that reason.
For sure. What's the most surprising thing that you've experienced in writing over the last 10 years?
I never expected when I started Cider Spoon Stories that every single interview I did, somebody would cry at some point, whether that was the client or me, because I was so moved by their story. But I think that's just the nature of sharing what you've gone through and feeling heard by somebody. There's just, there is a catharsis to that. There is a validation process that happens through that. And it's really healing, and it's such a privilege for me to get to try to help facilitate that for people. I'm not a trained therapist and it would not claim to be, but I think that's something all of us can do for anyone, is to sit down and ask them questions about their life and what's been important to them. The first book that I ghost wrote was my grandfather's. I already knew who he was, so it wasn't too far of a stretch for me to then attempt to write his book in his voice. But since then, I have had clients who are wildly different from me, who might be decades older or a different race or have a different cultural upbringing entirely, whose first language might not be English. I don't know, a million things that we don't necessarily have in common. And yet what's been surprising is how quickly we do find something in common, even though on the surface it doesn't seem like we should. And when you reach that place of just your shared humanity, that's also when you know it's going to make a good story for the reader.
It sounds like you put yourself in so many people's shoes over the years too.
It's amazing to get to do that,
yeah.
To understand what forces have shaped the way somebody sees the world and why, and to have my own perceptions challenged by that. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, that was my last question, was like, do you love the work that you do? And it sounds like you do.
I do. Yeah. In fact, I got off a call yesterday. I was helping, or will be helping, a woman write a legacy letter to her kids, which is a document you can include with your will for them to read after you've passed away. And it's just full of, the life advice that you have for them, the wishes you have for them, things, you might have changed about your own life so that they don't make those mistakes. And it's just such a beautiful idea and such a beautiful gift to your kids. And when I get to be involved in that and just get to, hear that person's life advice or or what they would have changed or what they hope for the world. I want to do that every day of my life.
No, that sounds so rewarding. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. I feel like I've really
Yeah.
learned a lot of really amazing things, and I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks, Keller.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. Stay curious, and until next time, this is Keller Davis signing off.